This episode is brought to you by our great sponsors. Do you build WordPress sites? Are you hitting the limit of your coding knowledge? Break free of your limits and do far more than you ever thought possible. Formidable Forms will help you build robust applications quickly without any PHP. Take on bigger projects, earn more clients, and grow your business. Get started today at buildpodcast.net/forms. That's buildpodcast.net/forms. BoldGrid works as a suite of plugins designed to help you create WordPress websites faster and easier than ever. BoldGrid will improve your workflow by providing direct access to free themes, page templates, photography, design elements, forms, galleries, and much more right from your dashboard. And the BoldGrid page builder allows you to easily drag and drop and edit this content as you see fit, all without having to use shortcodes. To learn more, head over to buildpodcast.net/boldgrid. That's buildpodcast.net/BOLDGRID. And now, on with the show. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of How I Built It, the podcast that asks, how did you build that? Today, my guest is, I always forget to ask how to pronounce the last name, so I hope I don't butcher this, Daniel Bachhuber of WP-CLI.
That's pretty good.
All right.
You got it.
Awesome. Daniel, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great.
Awesome. Thank you for joining me. We're going to talk about a product that I just recently started using, much to my dismay. I wish I started using it a long time ago. It helped me delete 3 million spam comments from a database where nothing else, literally nothing else worked. Using WP-CLI to write a direct query to the database was the thing that worked best for me. So I'm very excited to talk to you about this and everything that you've done for it and then plans for the future. So why don't we start off with telling us a little bit about you and about WP-CLI and how you came up with or acquired this idea, right? Because I think it was somebody else's before yours. Is that right?
Yeah, the project started about 5 or 6 years ago by a guy named by the name of Andreas. And then, he worked on it for a little bit. And then another guy by the name of Scribu, also known as Christy, picked it up, was the maintainer for a few years. And I picked up maintainership after that. So I really got into it from my time at WordPress.com VIP. And the context there is, WordPress.com VIP, at that time was hosted on WordPress.com. And WordPress.com is this massive WordPress multi-site installation, right? It's huge, tons and tons of code. Every VIP client is a theme in the themes directory, right? So thousands of clients potentially and thousands of themes. And one of the kind of aspects to working for WordPress.com VIP is running scripts against client sites. An example is I want to assign category B to all posts with category A. Well, because their site is hosted on WordPress.com and it's shared tenant architecture such that their site is sharing the same code base of, all the other sites on WordPress.com, it required us as, VIP code wranglers to run those scripts. And at the time, VIP had dozens of these scripts that performed one-off tasks, quite helpful, because you'd get a support ticket, someone wants to do something, then you'd look in the bin directory and see if there was a script for it. And if there was a script for it, then you saved yourself 2 hours of time writing a new script for it. However, the challenge at that point was that every one of these scripts had different usage instructions and different idiosyncrasies. And it was, 15 to 20 minutes each time to figure out how it worked and whether it actually worked for your needs or what it was slightly different than what you needed and you'd have to adapt it. And so that just kind of drove me bonkers up the wall. I'm an OCD, kind of details-oriented type of person. And I just could not handle the fact that all of these scripts were so difficult to run. So I wanted to standardize the usage instruction And Thorsten Ott, another VIP engineer at the time, recommended that I check out WP-CLI as a project to kind of emulate. There was already the concept of writing custom commands, so he suggested I write, custom commands for the different things I wanted to do. And I ended up getting really involved contributing to WP-CLI a lot of the bin scripts that were on the WordPress.com code base. And then from that, eventually Scribu decided that he no longer wanted to maintain WP-CLI. And so I stepped in as the new maintainer.
Nice. So WP-CLI is an open source project, right? Anybody theoretically can contribute to it?
Right. Open source, MIT licensed. I have a lot of thoughts on open source that have really matured over the years, which is kind of interesting. I do believe generally in this statement of, open source is one of the greatest ideas of our generation. It's had huge transformative impacts on every single industry already. And I think it's very much underappreciated. Many huge businesses are built on open source code where, whether or not that project is moving forward or not is not actually something that the company may even have visibility into. So they've created this dependency on, some piece of code that and community of volunteers and maintainers and that sort of thing that they just, don't have any interaction with. So it's open source, MIT licensed command line interface for WordPress. Anything that you can do through the WordPress admin, you can do at the command line. And, like you experienced, you don't really know what that means until you experience it. And it's just mind blowing. It's like, I used to do this through the web, like this is bonkers, and even when I use the web now, I have all the different URL patterns for the admin memorized, so I don't even I can bypass the clicking through, because the clicking through is actually somewhat time consuming.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like it really is. If anybody listening out there, I would encourage you to check out WP-CLI. I know the command line interface can be scary if you don't work in it a lot, but there are some things I do. There are some right before this call, Daniel's telling me how he's hanging pictures, and the one picture that was hanging up just fell. I'm gonna have to take a screenshot and include this.
And the frame broke too.
Oh,
this
man.
is the problem that I had with my last set of picture frames, and so I thought I got more durable hangers, and now I didn't, and so I'm actually probably going to take the rest of them down because I don't want to break more frames.
Oh man,
it's just to bring this back to the topic at hand. It's just like getting destroyed by a bug. Like you think you've fixed the bug, you've pushed it to production, it works for 5 minutes, and it's caused all these other problems that now you have to clean up.
Yep. So actually, that's a great segue because you're one of the more developer centric. You're like a heavy backend dev, I would say.
Oh, I do CSS too. Don't get me wrong. I do. Sweet. Actually, so one of my first jobs, I was digital media manager at CUNY Graduate School of Journalism, and I did everything from server admin to backend to front end to design on the front end to print design to teaching HTML CSS classes.
Nice. And are you from New York?
I'm from Portland, Oregon.
Oh, okay.
Well, gotcha. Outskirts of Portland, Oregon suburbs.
Gotcha. Cool. Very cool. So, but I guess some of the things that you do for WP-CLI is very heavy backend stuff. So, when you acquired WP-CLI, and this is also really interesting too, what was that process like? Because all of my guests, if not, I'm pretty sure all of my guests at this point have been working on projects and talked about projects that were their brainchild. But this was one that you acquired. So can you tell us a little bit about that process?
Sure. I think it goes even before then, because once I started contributing to the project, and there was not even an idea in my mind that I'd eventually become the maintainer. I was submitting a lot of pull requests and getting code reviewed and feedback from Christy. And that was... I immensely appreciated that experience because I felt like it brought my own skill set up, way up. And it was also an opportunity to better understand how, through that process, how he approached the project and thought of the project and made decisions about how to implement certain features, whether or not something makes sense to add as a feature, all these different decisions that you have to be making on a daily basis that are very implicit, judgment calls. There's not necessarily a rule book that you follow or easy way to make these decisions, because the decisions too can have long-term lasting impact for better or for worse. So you kind of really have to develop that philosophy of the project and how the project approaches the problem that set out to solve or the opportunity that set out to create, and be consistent and true to that. Because that consistency too, consistency in how application behaves is a key part of the user experience. If a user is going to be using your tool day in and day out, they expect it to operate similarly, even when it's a huge, massive application that does many different things. If there's little micro differences here and there, it can actually be a huge, mental burden and cost to the end user. Yeah, so, I spent a year just kind of under his tutelage learning, how he was approaching the project. And it was a big concern of mine to take it over, whether I would fulfill the same level of quality that he'd achieved, in running the project. And I'd like to think that I have, and I like to think that the ways that I've moved it forward have been, net positive for the project. But that's certainly a huge risk and challenge of handing off a project, is whomever you're handing it off to, are they going to, because there's kind of a implicit pact that you have with your users, for better or for worse, right? You're releasing this software to the world, you're releasing updates to it, you are developing a relationship with the users of your software, and from that you build trust and, hopefully a good working relationship. And so it can, in order to transfer that trust to someone else as an incoming maintainer, you have to have trust in them that they are going to uphold the nature of that trust.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you see that when you hear, one company is buying up some product that you love or something like that, you get worried that as an end user, is the product I love going to change?
Right.
So I mean, it's worth, that's definitely worth saying, it's just as hard as on the original developer to make that decision, and hopefully they're doing it for the greater good of their users. So you took on this open source project, and I think that, something that we see a lot in the WordPress community is, people building big businesses around open source projects, but that can always be a challenge. So when you took on WP-CLI, did you intend to try to build a business around it and make it profitable so that you could put time towards it? Or did you intend on having it kind of be like a pet project?
Sure, certainly. At the beginning, I had no intention ever to, try to commercialize it. To me, it was always this project that, I really enjoyed and appreciated, and, thought it fulfilled a valuable role in the ecosystem. And I wanted to just, as a part of my way of giving back or whatever, and to scratch my own itch, I wanted to see the project continue on as it had. In the last year, that thinking has changed a bit, in the sense that I've really come to appreciate. So, I spend a good amount of time on a regular basis maintaining the project. And I think that projects that last a long time and are considered healthy, it requires that input of regular, consistent labor. People doing the unsexy work that's needed to, keep the project healthy and move it forward. And so initially I'd gotten into that and been able to kind of contribute that on my own, on a volunteer basis, comfortably, alongside my consulting business. It just, I fitted in alongside all of my other work, and, would prioritize getting new releases out and that sort of thing. Although releases would be delayed by, up to 4 weeks, 5 weeks if I had some other big project that was going on, just taking all my time. And in the last year, I've really developed this opinion that WP-CLI, in order to be successful in the long term, needs substantial commercial investment, ideally, in my opinion, from a few different players, because, well, it needs commercial investment because, it had received my own commercial investment over a period of time, and I think benefited from that. But I can't be committed to the project, indefinitely, 30-year lifespan. And when it's time for me to move on, I want it to live on. I want it to be able to live on beyond me without having to, hope, depend on luck that someone else thinks it's within their, self-interest to volunteer, a huge amount of time towards the project. So, last year developed this opinion that it needs commercial investment, and I decided I'd start my own business as a way of being kind of the first one to contribute significantly to WP-CLI. And over the course of the year, the business, it actually evolved reasonably well. It was maybe doing as well as kind of like any other premium plugin sort of business could expect to be doing after a year. But I realized that, my own time is zero sum. And at the point of a month ago in December, that the time that I spent on my business run command was time taken away from WP-CLI, the project, because in both cases, it wasn't enough money coming in that it was I could take away from my work to put into my business. And because, they were on similar but divergent paths, I came to the realization that, as much as I want for this to work out, there's no guarantee that it's going to work out. And I think I just need to call a spade and end it as an experiment.
Gotcha. So I guess let's get to the banner question here, right? And there's a couple of ways that we can do this, right? And the banner question, of course, is how did you build WP-CLI, which was a pre-existing product that you've attempted to build a business around. So maybe you can kind of talk about your development tools and a couple of the deep dives into kind of the WordPress core to make it work, but also the things that you did to try to build a business around WP-CLI, what worked and what didn't work, and then we can move into kind of your plans for the future WP-CLI support.
Sure. So the first tool that comes to mind is a testing framework called BHAT. And BHAT is actually, I think it's business-driven development. Let me just Google that. Behavior-driven development. I don't know why I thought business. Anyways, point being, you might be familiar with, PHP unit and unit tests. And unit test is, a particular unit of functionality. So for instance, a function that formats zip codes, right? You'd write a series of unit tests to verify that, given all these different scenarios, where a scenario is some data that's input by an end user, the function correctly transforms that data into X. So BHAT is different in that your tests are actually written at a much higher level, written in a way that, if you have a form where credit card or a zip code is, an input field on that form, the BHAT kind of how the test would be approached perspective would be you'd write a test for the entire form, and the filling of that zip code field would just be, part of the bigger test of the behavior of the form being filled out and submitted, and the expected behavior of when you submit different values and that sort of thing. So it's a much higher level testing framework, and I think that it's actually really worked out well for WP-CLI, the project, in large part to how Christy set it up initially. But it's enabled us to, I think that build quality is a very important part of WP-CLI. not shipping bugs, not shipping regressions, that sort of thing. And when you get to a 5-6-year-old project, you really do need to have test coverage in place to have some level of sanity that you're not just causing, random bugs, that no one's going to discover for 6 months. And when they do, it'll be, painful discovery. And so because of BHAT, I think the project has been really able to mature at a healthy pace, a healthy clip, because all levels of contributors have been able to contribute to it, and it's easy for the maintainers to determine, yes, this contribution passes existing tests and add some new functionality, and there's new tests for that functionality, and so on.
Gotcha. So that's really cool. Testing is something that, automated testing, I should say, is something that has become very popular in the WordPress community in the last few years, I feel. And correct me on this analogy, but the unit test would almost be like kicking the tires on a car, right? Like making sure the air is in the tire. And then behavior testing would be like going on a test drive with the car. Is that about right?
Right. Going on a test drive in the car on a snowy road, on a dry road, on a rainy road, so on and so forth.
Gotcha. So those two can definitely work hand in hand. You do the unit tests, you release the full form, and then you do the behavior testing. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So with WP-CLI and there not being a kind of a front end piece to it, could you kind of maybe walk us through one of the behavior tests for that?
Sure. One of the ones I actually just wrote this morning, in fact, there's a series of commands around manipulating the object cache. So the WordPress object cache is, it's just the default implementation is in PHP memory. When it reads some data from the database, it'll store that in a consistent way in PHP memory to prevent that, when that same data is queried again, from it hitting the database again. So it's just a, easy to implement scaling layer. So WP-CLI, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. So just like you want to get the post with the ID 123, you grab it from the database at first and it's stored in object cache so that every time you want to access that post, you're not hitting the database. Is that
correct?
Okay.
Correct.
Cool.
And so there's a series of functions that you can call in your own code, WP cache get, WP cache set, that sort of thing, that there are equivalent WP-CLI commands. So actually, they're more or less the same, right? WP cache get is the function, but it's also the WP-CLI command. So the test that I wrote this morning, there's some behavior of the object cache in that you can save key value pairs of data. But those key value pairs of data can also be as a part of groups, and you aren't required to specify a group. You can just use the key value pair. But if you wanted to group your data, for a reason that makes sense for whatever you're working on, then you can do that. So WordPress's behavior is that if you don't supply a group, it uses the group of default. And when you don't supply a group, that also includes supplying an empty string as a group. Under the hood, it will change that to the default group. And so the messaging in WP-CLI was incorrect in that if you did WP cache set and your key was foo and your value was bar, and your group was left blank, it would say successfully set, object key in group, empty string. Well, I'm OCD about these sorts of things. And so I noticed that and thought, it would be more correct to display to the end user that the empty group that they've provided is actually the default group. Because when they go looking for where the data is, WordPress kind of equates those to be the same thing. So I wrote a series of BHAT tests that when I did WP cache set and didn't supply a group, it ended up in the default group, and the messaging, was corrected to be such. And BHAT, just you've got to check it out because it's so good. All of these tests are written in very human readable form. So even though you may not be familiar with like how Behat works under the hood and how all of this is happening. Once you become acquainted with the language, when I do this, then I expect to see this. You write that out in English, and then Behat executes the test suite for you. And, if something is wrong with your code and your tests aren't passing, you have a great degree of visibility into that. And not only that, but because it's automated, easily run it on every change to the code base. And it just it's hard for me to imagine working on a mature project without test coverage at this point, because I'm so terrified. It's easy to make accidental mistakes if you don't have test coverage. You just don't even, you may think the impact of this 2-line change that you're making, but you don't truly know the impact unless you have test coverage for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you make some assumption that X was working before I made the change, and therefore X is still working, but anything could have happened to X, if we know. So,
and to bring this back to running an open source project too, I think that tests are invaluable for a project, because if you want your project to be open to a variety of contributors, random drive-by contributions from people that, decided that they wanted to fix some bugs or whatever, trust is a huge factor of that, right? How do I trust this? How do I know that I can trust this person's code, and that the code that they're submitting, because they're coming by once, right? They're going to, submit a pull request, hopefully they'll see it through to completion. If it causes a bug and you have to deal with that bug 3 months ago, then it's kind of like net neutral contribution to the project, right? Because it's well, it's great, I love having new contributors, but if new contributors are just contributing a bunch of code, then it's my total amount of time and effort has been greatly increased. And so with tests as a part of the equation, you can really think through the contribution as a series of tests that you want to have passed. And if there aren't sufficient tests, then you say, hey, please add some tests to this, so that we can have this conversation about, in a very explicit way, describing how that new functionality is expected to work.
Gotcha. And that makes a lot of sense. That's really great to hear. I'm really glad that we're talking about the testing, because I think that's, at least for me, that's a big sticking point. I hate testing my code personally, because, I'm essentially, I build something and then I'm trying to break it. But to kind of keep it on the open source project route, like we said a little while ago, making these things make financial sense could be tough, right? Recently, it was announced that you tried to do a few things to make some money to allow yourself to spend more time on WP-CLI, and an announcement came out that it was falling under kind of the WordPress.org blanket. Is that right? Could you talk a little bit about, as much as you can, how that happened, and then what that kind of means for the future of WP-CLI?
Sure. So basically what happened is, the beginning of December, I came to this conclusion that, creating run command, premium commands business isn't going to work out. I just don't have a great degree of confidence. And part of that is the lack of confidence is that I think it's really hard to sell developer tools to developers, because there's this, unless it's something obvious, like an application that you can download, but when it's of the open source realm already, people are, there's just a negative mindset. And similarly too, I found that when I was working on the premium WP-CLI stuff, it wasn't as enjoyable, because I had less users, I didn't have people asking as many questions. I like working in the open. I like being able to accept contributions from people and that sort of thing. So I just came to the conclusion, it's not going to work out. And as a last ditch effort, I launched this kind of really the best way to describe it is give me money campaign. Very direct ask. How much is WP-CLI worth to you? If it's worth, $100 a year, then give me $100 a year. If it's worth $1,500 a year, give me $1,500 a year. If it's worth, $7,000 a year, then give me $7,000 a year. And it was, it's I'll give this about 10-15% chance of working out. where working out is being able to raise a reasonable amount of money. And I haven't made that number public because I think that there's a lot of challenges with like transparency reports. But at a high level, my goal is to be able to pay myself part-time to work on the project, and then also be able to hire, and this is still the goal, to be able to hire a couple other people to work part-time on the project. And I think the part-time aspect's really important because I think that you need to be solving problems in the real world and have real world problems to solve. But then you also need dedicated time to contribute those solutions back to the open source project that you're responsible for. I think a lot of open source projects actually struggle because their contributor base doesn't really have the dedicated time to seeing a solution through in the project that they've been dependent on. So like Give Me Money campaign, ran it for a week. I'd kind of gotten to like a break even point. It was not great timing, to be frank. Like asking companies for money at the end of the year when their budgets are already pretty much done. It's like, not the best decision making on my part. But what it came down to was I actually don't own the WP-CLI.org domain. And I was talking with Andreas, the original creator, about him giving it to me in some form. And he was on the fence about whether or not to give it to me outright or lease it to me for like $1 a year under some terms, because it's this, it's like there's parallels in the real world. It's like a park that I'm responsible for maintaining. And there's like the original creator of the park that wants to make sure that the park remains like open for everyone to use and that the monetization aspects don't like hamper people's abilities to use the park. Mm-hmm. And the timing for this, kind of negotiation was the same time that I was meant to take a vacation and like just be able to mentally check out from work. So again, not great timing on my part. And when I finally, got to talking with him again, I was, the kind of give me money ask. The intent for that only was ever to like make enough money to be able to hire people to work on the project. It wasn't to like operate a independent business that's like profitable that I'm going to sell. And so, just kind of given the challenges involved, I was like, this is like, it doesn't make sense to do this independently just because like, even if I can like raise enough money for the first year, well, the give me money, like my goal was, kind of bare minimum. And then I was going to like run advertising on the site or something to make more money.
Yeah.
So I was just like, not going to work out. And the WP-CLI being the official WordPress project has always been in the cards. Like personally, I have liked its independence in the sense that like I feel like that independence gives it the opportunity to operate at the intersection of everyone's needs and commercial wants and not necessarily be like influenced by one, key stakeholder. But I think I've got an arrangement worked out with Matt now where like I can still feel comfortable with that, but it also now has a long-term future because like if I get hit by a bus, like there's going to be more people that can just kind of like pick it up. And, who knows how the project would move forward after that point. But at the very least, like I no longer feel solely responsible, for the project. And two, I think it's like really important to acknowledge and appreciate that just because it's an official WordPress.org project doesn't mean like I'm still fundraising. Like I'm like at about a fifth of the way towards where I want to be. And WordPress itself is the creation of, dozens of companies that contribute, significant amounts of employee time towards the project, right? There's DreamHost employees, there's GoDaddy employees, there's Bluehost employees, there's Automatic employees. And a lot of that, is kind of like, come from Matt's ability to negotiate that with the companies. And so for WP-CLI, it's a little bit different of an experiment in that the funding will actually come from a variety of entities. Like I think I've gotten 60 individuals to contribute so far. And it's going to fund, part-time involvement instead of full-time involvement, which I think will lend itself more productively to WP-CLI project. But at the end of the day, behind every, well-maintained open source tool that we love is some company that's decided that it's worthwhile to contribute significant amount of time and effort and investment into the project. And without that, then projects just kind of, fall apart and aren't maintained anymore. And, everyone's, it's like, I actually just started using Laravel Valet, which is amazing. Nice. It's like, so good. I love it. And then I look at the issue tracker and there's like, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 issues or something. And a lot of them don't have replies. And it's like, doesn't make me feel super great to be dependent on this tool that's not being, super actively maintained.
Yeah, I've actually heard like some fodder about the people, like the gatekeepers who are like, that's not an issue, and then just like close issues. And I don't know if that's Laravel, the project, or Laravel Valet, but that doesn't instill a lot of happy feelings in me. But we might be a little bit over time. This half hour has flown by. We talked about a lot of great stuff, and I want to end with the question that I ask all of my guests, which is, do you have any trade secrets for us?
Yeah. My favorite trade secret is time tracking, because there was a time where I didn't pay attention or keep track of how I spent my time, and now I do. And now I have much more awareness of how I spend my time, and I feel much more in control of how I spend my time. And I think that is like the most important thing for long-term success in open source, because, open source is just like always going to be demanding of all of your attentions, and you'll feel obligated to work on it on the weekend and that sort of thing. And if you don't have awareness into how much time you're spending on open source, you really have no effective way of evaluating, your kind of success in what you're doing, I think.
Gotcha. And what do you use to track time?
I use Harvest. It's amazing.
Harvest. Awesome.
Love it. They only charge me $12 a month, and it's like, you guys need to charge me way more, because I get way more value out of this than $12 a month. It's got a little awesome Mac widget thing that's like money for login time.
Nice. That's fantastic. Well, Daniel, thank you so much for joining me today. I really enjoyed talking with you about a whole bunch of things. I'm sure the listeners did too.
Hey, thanks so much.
Hey, everybody. I want to tell you about a new book I wrote with my good friend Matt Medeiros of the Matt Report called The Podcast Starter Kit. It's a QA-style book that tells you exactly what you need to get up and running with your own podcast. I've had lots of fun over the last several months with how I built it, and I want to share what I've learned with anybody looking to start their own podcast. In the book, Matt and I try our hand at answering 23 questions that you need to ask yourself before you get up and running. We also include several resources, our favorite equipment, and a checklist at the end. Head over to thepodcastbook.com to check it out. It's only $24, and it'll save you hours of time researching the right tools, where to upload your podcast, how to run a good interview, and a lot more. That's thepodcastbook.com. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks to our great guest and fantastic sponsors. If you liked the show, please rate it and subscribe on iTunes, in Google Play, or whatever your podcast app of choice is. If you have any questions, be sure to reach out at howibuilt.it. And finally, until next week, get out there and build something.